Welcome back to my Pokemon Platinum Hardcore Nuzlocke using only Poison Type Pokemon. In the last episode, we began attempt number 5 from Route 207 and fought through 3 boss fights, including Fantina with her tricky Miss Magius, Barry and his balanced team, and finally we brought down Maylene and her brutal Lucario for our 4th gym badge. We've got our eyes on Pastoria City next, where we'll finally be able to pick up some more encounters. Let's do this. You may not realize it just yet, but that 4th gym badge is going to catapult the overall power level of our team. Not only are we going to get a couple of evolutions just in time for Crasher Wake's level cap, but we've got some pretty incredible new encounters lined up as well. And just as the series has gone so far, we've got a lot to cover in this episode, so let's get into it. We start off by getting Lucas's Pokedex back from Team Galactic, and in the process we obtain the HM for Fly, which always feels awesome. Game Freak did a really good job with the pacing in Platinum in my opinion. The western side of Sinnoh is interconnected fairly well, making it easy to backtrack through routes such as Route 206 for example. It's much more difficult to traverse the region as a whole on foot once you access the eastern side, so it's nice that Fly appears in Veilstone, which is pretty much at the exact point in the game where backtracking would become really cumbersome. With our little side mission out of the way, it's time to move on. I did fly back to Hearthome City just to see if it was possible to access Route 212 at this point. Back in Diamond and Pearl, you could easily get to Pastoria before Veilstone, since you could do gyms number 4 and 5 in any order. So I was just wondering if Pastoria would be accessible from the other side in Platinum. And it isn't. I was just curious though. Let's move on to Route 214. Biggest highlight here for me is obtaining our first Citrus Berry, and we'll want to make sure we multiply those as the playthrough progresses. This route can also be another nice grinding spot using the Versus Seeker. The trainers here have a lot of fully evolved Pokemon, but the Pokemon themselves are either on the weaker side, sorry to call you out here Tropius, or in the case of Collector Douglas for example, some of these Pokemon have fairly weak movesets overall, so we should be able to train fairly safely. We pick up the Razor Fang to give one of our Pokemon a chance to flinch on every attack, and the TM for Dig in the Ruin Maniac's Cave. Moving through the Valor Lakefront, we end up on the grounds of the Hotel Grand Lake, most commonly labeled as more of a backtracking section, where most of the solid pickups here will come after we get the HM for Rock Climb. We did decide to take on some of the battles in the restaurant, which were not too challenging this time around, but it's still fun. And as we continue south, we end up on the sandy beaches of Route 213. I feel like that old guy with the metal detector just walking around looking for treasure. I decided to avoid the fishermen using the Gyarados this time around. We still don't have a solid answer for it, but don't worry, we will very soon. And the TM for Aerial Ace caps off our journey to Pastoria. I love this city so much. But now it's time to get serious, so we'll start by pretending to be one of our next encounters. We clear out the berry patch in town so we can get to work on those citrus berries. We pick up a free one from the lady inside this house. A Colbur berry is a very nice safety net for our future Gengar. And now let's grab that encounter. While I'm not the biggest fan of rainy routes in general, I'll give Route 212 a pass for being loaded with great items and features. For this run, we've got the TM for Toxic, an Elixir, and later on we'll be able to also pick up a Poison Jab as well. Can't forget about the Move Tutor either, and probably the best one out of all of them, honestly. Time for that encounter. And it is, of course, Croagunk. Quick side note regarding the Gen 4 game differences here, I believe that you can only obtain Croagunk in the Great Marsh in Diamond and Pearl, which not only would have made it far more difficult to catch because of the chance for it to flee, but it also would have meant that we actually lose an encounter as well, since there's another poison type we'll be going for in there a bit later that has also made the Great Marsh its home. It's just cool you can now actually get a Croagunk outside of the marsh. And as far as how Toxicroak can contribute to the team, I think it's great. It gets a ton of physical coverage options, and it's fast enough to become a formidable sweeper, for sure. Really cool type combination, just gotta watch out for those psychic types. Toxicroak is also pretty frail in general, so we'll have to use it carefully. But because it is such a customizable Pokemon, it will excel in filling in any of the gaps we may have in our offensive toolkit. Moving into the northern end of the route, we begin our grind grind for the boss fights coming up. And not just for experience either, we need money. This lovely lady and gentleman here will gladly empty their fat pockets for us so that we may utilize that money to gain immense power and defeat our enemies. Hey, I'm just saying it like it is. And in the process, our starter finally evolves. I am very excited to use Skunk Tank. I truly believe that he can make a huge impact for us. And from one big evolution to the biggest of them all, it's about damn time your boy get in the ring himself and start wreaking havoc. Crobat caused a lot of damage through the early game, but Sinnoh ain't ready to deal with this. Back in Pastoria, and it's time for another rival fight. This is what we've got now. Pretty big difference from the beginning of the episode. Let's deal with Barry. This poor Staravia. Sorry man, I gotta break in this new weapon somehow. Weasel comes in and suffers the same fate. Not sure what Barry was expecting to happen there. And now with Grottle, I give our Crobat a chance this time, because she didn't have the opportunity in the last encounter we had with our rival. Grottle does hold on after the first cross poison, but in typical Barry fashion, he goes for the withdraw. And with Ponyta bringing up the rear, I simply keep in Crobat to finish the job with Fly. It took more than one hit surprisingly, but eventually Barry goes down again in probably the most embarrassing fashion yet. He'll get a lot tougher the next we meet, but man, this was brutal. Now it's time for the gym. I let Roselia build up some levels in here as we navigate through the trainers. And now, it's time for Crasher Wake and badge number 5. Call it a hunch, but I have a feeling this will end badly for Sinnoh's WWE superstar. And you know we gotta have at least one of these in every series. No need to analyze, let's just watch together. Quagsire falls, and badge number 5 is in our possession. Let's work on tracking down the blue-haired terrorist before he gets away. You know, Looker, we could be spending our time running after the guy and not just standing around doing nothing. Also, for a grunt entrusted with setting off a bomb, you'd think Team Galactic would provide him with a Pokemon that can better defend himself? Anyway, after dealing with that whole scenario and Barry mistakenly thinking Cynthia is our sister, she rewards us with our next progression mechanism. But before we head over to Celestic Town, we've got yet another encounter to pick up in the Great Marsh back in Pastoria. I'm not joking, this is literally the first time I'm looking into these binoculars during this series, and I already found it. If it wasn't obvious enough already, Skorupi is our target, and while Skorupi itself is quite bad, Drapion is an absolute monster. Great typing, shares that with our Skunk Tank, it gets access to a ton of moves, it's a super tank, there's really nothing at all to complain about. Drapion will stack up well against basically the rest of the game, and I'm very excited to use one. Well, shit. I don't think I've ever had that happen to me yet in any playthrough where I used a Safari Zone encounter. I actually think this is the first time. Okay, so no Drapion then, at least in this attempt. That sucks a lot, but that's just how it goes with these types of encounters sometimes. Does anyone know what the rates are for fleeing in these types of zones? Is it different for each Pokemon? I'm curious to know all of the variables involved in that calculation. Even though we won't have Drapion for this attempt, I still think we can manage with what we have now, and we do have one more very important encounter coming up a little bit later as well. Let's move on. The notorious foggy section of Route 210 is up next, but we are much more prepared for it this time around than we were in the walkthrough, where we had a couple of close calls. The biggest fight here being against Ace Trainers Zach and Jen, which is an optional fight by the way, but while my blood pressure does rise quite quickly whenever I encounter these two, it's always a fun and interesting fight, because you just don't know how the fog is going to manipulate the outcome. Gengar's Thunderbolt misses right out of the gate, and my heart flutters. Raichu opts for a Thunder Shock instead of a Bolt for some reason. Skunk Tank prepares for a dig, and Gyarados thankfully misses as well. The Thunderbolt connects on the next turn, and the scariest threat for us has been dealt with. Skunk Tank goes for the dig, and misses. Back to square one with this Raichu. I send in Roselia to replace Gengar after the tail whips from the previous turn, and I go for some more attacks. Roselia's Giga Drain does connect, but Skunk Tank is still held back by the paralysis. I switch him out for Dustox, and this Raichu is just sitting here wagging its tail over and over again. A quick attack does come out with a crit, but Dustox is finally able to end the battle with a decisive Silver Wind. Like I said, stressful, but still a lot of fun to watch. The rest of the route went all according to plan, and we are now in Celestic Town. As usual, we pick up the items lying around town, although I'm not sure why I even bothered with the Dragon Fang. I can't use it for anything. Maybe it'll sell for some cash. And of course, we pick up our free pairs of glasses, because apparently we are so blind that we need 3. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm going to thoroughly enjoy watching Gengar destroy everything with these. They honestly may be necessary though against some of the later fights, and with such few encounters for the run, I think the use of choice specs here is fine. Let's end this episode with a bang. No, not another bomb, but with our first battle against Team Galactic's Cyrus. Let's break in these choice specs. I start this fight with Gengar, who calls upon Zeus himself to literally rain bolts of hell from the skies. Sneasel doesn't stand a chance. Cyrus, who seems to be completely oblivious to the current situation, sends in his Murkrow next. Gengar looks back at me in astonishment and says, "Is this guy for real?" To which I reply, "I don't know, man, throw another one out there and see what happens." Murkrow obviously goes down to another Thunderbolt, and Cyrus sends out yet another flying type in a desperate attempt to maintain his pride and dignity. But we all know where this is going. Well, that went well. Maybe a little too well, but that's what choice specs will do for you. After the fight, Cynthia's grandmother gives us the HM for Surf, and for the time being, it would appear that we have built a poison powerhouse. I've started to grow very attached to these guys, and even without Drapion, I hope we can go all the way this time. And with that, this episode is now over. We've jumped up in power level quite a bit in this episode, and our reward for being patient seems like it's really paying off now. One more encounter remains as we look to push closer to the endgame. Let's see what we can accomplish in attempt number 5. In the meantime, as usual, please like the video if you liked it, and subscribe for more content like this. That's it from me. I'll see you next time.